Okay, in this video, I'm going to create the coffee program from start to finish. So here I am in Visual Studio. I'm going to go File, New, Project. Then I'm going to make sure that I go to Visual C++, a Win32 console application, and then I'm going to find the location to put it in and make sure that it's on my Z drive. And I'm just going to call this the coffee program. Now it's very important that I make sure that this is an empty project. So I'm going to go into the application settings and make sure I check empty project and uncheck this. Click finish, and now I've created my project. Then the next step is going to be to add the source code to my project. So now I just go to project, add new item, go to code and name this coffee.c and add it to my project, and now I have my source code here. So always the first thing in any source code is going to be the header with your name. So I'll put my name, and then you also want to include the coffee program description. Of course, you will also include the date and stuff, but I'm just going to get started right away. Now I've gone ahead and I've put the algorithm. I have the algorithm ready to go. So once I've created my algorithm, it's very helpful. So then I know my algorithm, and then I can start writing the program. So the algorithm for this is we're going to greet the user, then we're going to ask for the number of cups of coffee, get the number of cups of coffee. We're going to repeat that 2 more times. Then we're going to calculate the sum, print the sum to make sure it's correct, calculate the average, and print the results. So if you've gotten your algorithm down, it's very, very helpful, because then you'll be able to write your code by following the algorithm. And I'm going to do this by testing along the way. So the first thing we need to have in our program, since we want to do input and output, is we need to have pound include stdio.h. It's important that we add that into our program, because otherwise we will not be able to use printf and scanf. In addition, since we are using a Microsoft compiler, we do want to add the information so that we do not get the warnings in our program. So I have to go find some other code here, and I will get that warning off of this other coffee program. So what that is this pound define CRT no warnings. This will just keep us from getting any warnings about scanf, and it doesn't have to be there, but it prevents the program from having all of these extra warnings that you really don't want. The next thing I'll do is I'll set up my main function, and this is a block of code, so it will have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. Now I'm putting my algorithm inside of my block of code, because what I plan to do is I plan to implement each of these steps in my algorithm and test along the way. So our main program will have a return 0, and then we will be ready to get started. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is just build it and make sure that I haven't put any kind of weird stuff in my code. Make sure I'm starting with a buildable program. So I'm going to compile it and build it, and it succeeded. So now if I run it, it's not going to do anything, so I'm not going to waste the time doing that. All right, so number 1 is greet the user. So to greet the user, you just use a printf function. Inside of the printf function argument for the function call, you put your statement that you want printed onto the screen. So I'm just going to greet the user by saying welcome to the coffee program. \n is how you go to a new line, and the semicolon goes after. So now I will build it. And I will test it, and it should print welcome to the coffee program onto the screen. So it's working so far. So the next steps that we want to do are we want to ask and get the number of cups of coffee, and we want to do that 3 times. So we're going to need 3 variables to store the cups of coffee. And usually if you're measuring, if you're asking how many cups of coffee people drink, usually that would be in whole numbers, so we will use integers. Cups 1, cups 2, and cups 3. So I have these 3 integers. These integers, I don't need to initialize them to anything because I'm actually going to be storing the input from the user into each one of these. So how do I ask the user for the number of cups of coffee? Well, the same way I printed my welcome onto the screen, I'm going to also print a statement that says, how many cups of coffee do you drink a day? So I'm going to have the user enter how many cups of coffee do you drink? And then I'm going to get the number of cups of coffee. To get the number of cups of coffee, I need to read in from the keyboard. Now keep in mind that printf only prints onto the screen and scanf reads from the keyboard. So to scanf, I need to use my placeholder for integer, which is %d. And then I don't want to forget my ampersand, and I'm going to scan into cups 1. So this should say how many cups of coffee do you drink, and then scan it in. And I can build it and test it to make sure that it works. Now I have a couple warnings here, but the warnings are just telling me that I'm not using the cups 2 and cups 3 variables. And now I will run it. How many cups of coffee do you drink? 5, and it's working. So I would like to show you what happens if I do get an error. For example, if I spell printf wrong. So when I go to build it, it has an error. So when you come here, sometimes it's very obvious what's happening, and sometimes it's not, because it gave me a warning that print is undefined, but then it won't link and it won't run. So sometimes you can click on this right here and you get a little line here that shows you where the problem is. And usually you can start by the first problem and then work your way through trying to find the other problems. So I know by looking at this that it shouldn't be print, but it should be printf. So now I'm going to rebuild it and make sure that that is correct. All right. So now, just to save time, I'm going to pause the video and ask and get 2 more cups of coffee. Okay, so now I'm back, and I have asked how many cups of coffee do you want to drink 3 times? And I'm scanning the first time into cups 1, the second time into cups 2, and the third time into cups 3. So now let's build it and make sure it works. Now I can start without debugging or put Control F5. And how many cups of coffee do you drink? 5. How many cups of coffee do you drink? 4. How many cups of coffee do you drink? 2. So it's working. It's getting 3 cups of coffee. And if I look at my algorithm that's here, number 8 is to calculate the sum. So in order to calculate the sum, I need to go back up here and declare a variable to store the sum. In addition, while I'm up here, I'm going to declare a variable to store the average as well. So I don't have to go back up there again. And see, all variable declaration should be at the beginning of a function. So number 8 is calculate the sum. So we have a variable called sum. And how do we calculate the sum? We calculate the sum by adding cups 1 plus cups 2 plus cups 3. So we will add cups 1 plus cups 2 plus cups 3. And the result is going to be assigned to the sum. So the assignment is getting assigned to the variable called sum. So the way that you read this is you say sum equals cups 1 plus cups 2 plus cups 3. And at the end you put a semicolon, and that's a statement. That's an assignment statement. Now if we want to print the sum to make sure that we have added correctly, or just to check that it's working, you just say printf. I'm going to put a \n to make sure it goes on a new line. The sum is %d. %d is the placeholder for integer, and we're going to put the variable sum. All right, so now let's test it. So if we add a 2 plus a 3 plus a 1, the sum is 6. So it's calculating correctly and it's working correctly. Now the next step is to calculate the average and then print the results, and we're done. So to calculate the average, we want to assign it to the variable average, and that's going to be calculated by taking the sum and dividing it by 3.0. Now you can try some different things. You can see if this will calculate it correctly, or we could just try this and see what happens. So let's just first do this and see what happens. Then we can print the average. Now the average is a double, so we print the average is %.2f, and we put the variable average. So if we can make a sum that is not divisible by 3, so then it will do integer division because we are using integers. Sum is an integer and 3 is an integer. So let's try that. Something that adds up to something that's not divisible by 3. So we have a 5 and a 4, that's 9, plus 2 is not divisible by 3. So the sum is 11 and the average is 3. And it did not, what it did is it took 11 and divided by 3 and just got rid of anything that was left over. So 3 goes into 11 3 times, but there are 2 left over. But we want it to present as a double, so in order to do that, we just temporarily turn our sum into a double by putting the word double in front of it. And we can also change the 3 to a 3.0. So now we're doing the sum as a double and dividing it by a double. And now let's build. Let's try again. A 5 and a 4 and a 2 is 11. And the average is 4. Five and 4 and 2, and the average is 3.67. So what I had forgotten to put here is the 0.2. That says how many decimal places. If I put a 0.3, then it will go to 3 decimal places. Okay, I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about simple interactive programs in C.